Hello everyone. This talk is a more detailed explanation about the initiation test that I had whilst on a week's retreat at the headquarters of the Great White Brotherhood. On arrival I'd handed the female founder some tapes and writings I had done under the inspiration of the Spirit Brotherhood. On retreat we each had our own bedroom, and on the first night I was woken up by a monk shaking my shoulder. He smiled kindly and said I was very welcome because I was well known to them and had done good work in past lives and had more to do for them. With that he disappeared. Well, that's the first intimation I had that he was a spirit or a ghost. There was no feeling of fear, as the whole building seemed to have a feeling of absolute peace. Well, next morning a few of us on retreat walked across the large lawn in front of this country mansion, across a path that went round the lawn, and we stood balancing on a grassy slope that led up to a field on which it was intended to build a new temple, and we were discussing this project when I heard the sound of chanting, and looking towards the top of the lawn I saw perhaps a group of 12 monks walking along the path 2 by 2 chanting. Their heads were bowed, their hands were folded inside or clasped inside the white sleeves of their brown cloaks, and the cowls were pulled up over their heads, and I couldn't see faces because they had their heads bowed. Well, as this group of monks was passing us, the man stood next to me stumbled backwards and would have fallen into the monks if I hadn't have grabbed hold of him and said, "Be careful of the monks." Well, at this the whole group of other men looked at me and as if I was half mad because they couldn't see these monks. By now they'd gone past us and were disappearing around the far end of the lawn and behind some shrubbery as the chanting died away. Well, the first lesson, I was left feeling rather foolish as they made their way across to the first lesson in the building, but I followed on eventually, and the first lesson was taken by the female founder, who started off by asking, "Has anyone seen our monks?" Well, I explained what I'd seen, and she said I was very blessed because normally only the founding family saw these monks. And she went on to explain that there'd previously been a very ancient monastery on the site, and it was thought that these monks had been working and living in that ancient monastery, when they were alive, that is. Well, with the commendation of the founder, from then on I was treated as quite normal and accepted as part of the brotherhood by the others on retreat, and so it just goes to show how one man's normality is another man's abnormality. Well, 2 nights later, instead of going to the evening prayers in the chapel at 9 o'clock, I was told to go to the founder's private sitting room. This private sitting room was brightly furnished, brightly lit, although the curtains were closed, of course. Well, it was night time anyway, but they're always kept closed in the Brotherhood rooms because they think the light dissipates their spirit power, which in itself is significant, of course. Anyhow, she asked me, she said that the tapes that I'd handed to her and writings on arrival had amazed her because they were precisely the same as the ones that she was currently dictating to be published after her death. "Who do you think your inspirer is, Keith?" I replied, "Well, I think it might be divine," but she said, "Why do you think that?" And I said, "Well, some of the messages are intended for the Christian church." Well, she blew up at that. Her whole demeanour changed. She was very, very angry indeed. "You mustn't interfere with the Christian churches, Keith, they will use their power and destroy us, she cried. Well, this came as a complete surprise to me because I didn't think the Christian church had any power, but while I'm conjecturing on this, she was suddenly transfigured. Her head and shoulders disappeared into a grey mist, and her and coming forth from this mist was at first what seemed like a long neck that turned into a snake, and this snake with evil eyes was heading for my forehead, and I knew if its fangs had touched me I would have been damned for all time. Well, by now I was paralysed with fright. I couldn't move from the chair, but my mind was active, so I called out to God to come and save me, and very blessed I am that he did. It was as if there was an invisible battle being fought in the spirit realms around us, and I was kind of being buffeted from side to side as there were kind of sword thrusts and lance thrusts, and I got the impression that I couldn't see anything at all, but I got the impression that God's angels were driving the evil ones away. Well, soon the creature it got to within about 6 inches of my forehead when it started to recede, where it dissolved into the grey mist when it got back to the medium, and in a few minutes' time the mist dissolved and the medium's, that's the founder I'm talking about, her normal features started to reappear. Well, once she seemed to be coming round from the trance she was in, I closed my eyes and waited until I could hear her move and that she was normal, and I then pretended to come around from a trance myself because I knew they mustn't know, she mustn't know, and any of her colleagues what I'd experienced. I wasn't supposed to have seen what had happened. She just dismissed me and said I must be under the inspiration of another section of the White Brotherhood. Well, amazingly, back in the amazingly, next morning I had proof of what had happened, because the first lesson was taken by one of the founder's daughters, and it was how by deep meditation and ritual to contact the dormant spirit snake that lies at the base of all our spines. If we can bring this snake alive, they said it climbs up our spine to our head, where it develops wings and takes our soul to heaven. She went on to say that this was called the Kundalini snake of yoga and Hindu belief. Well, I listened to all this with amazement. I didn't take any of it in. I closed my mind to it because I'd seen what happens when this snake is brought alive. It doesn't go to our head and fly to heaven. It's like a lair inside the medium's body, and it can transfigure the medium to come out and paralyse a victim with fright and then strike its head to damn it for Satan for all time. Well, I was ultra cautious. I knew I had to escape from the Great White Brotherhood. I knew their spirits were evil, and one thing was certain, I had to escape, and would you believe it, my employers at that time offered me a transfer from the south of England to Belfast. Well, could I uproot my family from our comfortable life in the Thames Valley that included a wet boathouse complete with cruiser? This was a major decision, but I knew that in spite of what had happened, I knew I would have difficulty withdrawing from their influence unless I could put distance between us. Well, fortunately we left, and none of my family has ever regretted this move. First, however, I had to undergo the trauma of the spirits going with me and the retaliation I described in part 1 of this series of talks. Thank you very much for listening.